Welcome to the Earth Your Wow podcast, brought to you by Reuserbox, providing a better way to buy cardboard boxes. We're your hosts, Jack and Ellie.
This is the podcast where we talk to industry experts and change makers to try to answer the question, how do we make our businesses better for people and the planet?
Today we're joined by Annie Olivier, Head of Growth at B Lab UK. Annie spent over a decade working across environmental justice, social causes, and SME development before joining B Lab in 2022 to drive inclusion and scalable systems change. We'll explore how she's helping businesses share economic benefits more equitably and why B Corp isn't just a label, but a movement aiming to rethink capitalism. Welcome, Annie, to Earth Your Wow.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So for those listening who don't already know, can you explain what the B Corp movement is and how you're a part of that mission?
So B Corps are companies that meet really high standards of social and environmental performance. They go through quite a rigorous process where they share information on all of their operations, from their governance to their worker policies, their environmental impact, their customer stewardship, and their community impact. They also go through a third-party audit, so they need to demonstrate how they're meeting all of these different requirements, the positive impact that they're having, and then they also make a legal change. So in the UK, companies actually amend their articles of association to say that when they're making key decisions within the business, they're not just thinking about the impact that that might have on profit or on shareholders, but also the impact that it might have on the environment and on people. So whether it's their workers or customers. So B Corps are meeting these high standards of social and environmental performance, but they're also making a legal change, committing them to a more purposeful way of doing business and balancing all the needs of different stakeholders.
Cool. And how are you like a part of that at B Corp? Like, what are you driving?
Yeah, so I'm the head of growth at B Lab UK. And really what I'm thinking about is how we build a community of B Corps here in the UK that are really going to make the case that all businesses can work in this way. What that means for me is ensuring that we have a really representative community of B Corps. So I want to make sure that we have all sectors represented, all different sizes of business, in all parts of the country. And each B Corp that joins the movement really then acts as a proof point that business can be done in a way that balances all of the needs of stakeholders and still be profitable. So I think a lot about where there are gaps in the community in the UK B Corp movement and how we reach those different businesses and then how we support them through certification.
And where are those gaps?
So when I started in 2022, we did a bit of an analysis on the community, and the clear gaps that we had were threefold. So the first one was regional. There are a lot of B Corps in London. It's kind of considered the B Corp capital of the world. So we're heavily represented in London. We're also well represented in the South, so in particular in the Southwest. And it's growing. So we do have representation across the country right now, but a big focus for me has been on growing the movement in the Northwest and Wales in particular, but really anywhere outside of the south of England. The second gap was around ownership demographics. So we were predominantly seeing companies that were led by white men. And actually, in terms of the business community in the UK, we didn't do too badly in terms of women-led businesses or ethnic minority, people of color-led businesses. But we're not just trying to reflect what the current business makeup looks like. We're trying to reflect what a future economic system could look like. So I think we had around maybe 28% of B Corps were led by women. In the UK, it's a little bit less than that in terms of how many businesses are led by women, but we really wanted to look at population demographics instead. So we think 50% of B Corps should be led by women, and we have made some pretty significant gains in that over the last couple of years. We're closer to around 33% right now, which is great. So ownership demographics was the second gap that we identified. And then the third one was really around large businesses. So the UK economy is majority made up of small and medium-sized enterprises. but we still have a relatively small community. So we are looking at a majority of our community that are SMEs, and we had fewer kind of multinational corporations or very large companies in the community. So we have been thinking about how we reach more of those larger companies as well, to demonstrate that purposeful business isn't just something for small kind of 1 to 10 people businesses. This kind of work can actually be done at a very large scale as well.
Hmm. And you've had quite a unique journey, from our research. So you started in like environmental justice. You were working in business productivity, if that's right. And now obviously at B Lab. So I just kind of wondered, is there like a common thread that ties all of that experience together? And why? Presumably, you feel like B Corp is the place where you can achieve systems change. So, like, what is it about B Corp that makes you feel that, if
Hmm.
that's right?
Yeah, so I did a degree in political science. I've always been really interested in systems change in particular, but environmental and social justice have been quite core to my kind of personal values, and I knew that that was the type of work I wanted to do. When I first started out, I was mainly working for environmental justice campaigns, also social campaigns. I worked for a food poverty organization for quite a while here in the UK. And I found that work really meaningful. But I also was quite interested in business and the role of business, especially in the food poverty organization I worked at, thinking about the role of business in actually creating some of these challenges in the first place, felt quite important to me. And I took a bit of a detour. I was still working for a nonprofit, but what we were focused on was tackling the productivity problem in the UK. So, thinking about how small and medium-sized enterprises can operate more effectively and more efficiently in order to boost the economy. And the hypothesis here was really that if we could boost productivity in the UK, then this would have sort of a trickle down effect, and it would make people's lives easier. It would mean that they're taking home more pay. But I always thought that there was a bit of a piece missing to this puzzle. I definitely believe that there's a productivity problem, and that if we improved it, that some of this could affect, salaries, for example. But I also have a sneaking suspicion that some of that might actually not be directed towards the workers. Some of those benefits might not be seen by employees, and therefore by regular citizens in the UK. And what I really wanted to tackle was the systems that were redistributing this wealth. And also, if we were more productive, what would the impact of that be on our environment? What kind of productivity are we talking about, and who is it intended to serve? So I really enjoyed the experience. I loved working with small businesses. I loved learning how they work, how they can become more efficient. And a lot of those companies that were really productive and really efficient also thought a lot about purpose and the positive impact that they were having on all of their stakeholders, which is when kind of the B Corp movement was introduced to me. It was actually introduced to me by one of our B leaders, who are sustainability consultants that support companies through B Corp certification. He's a bit of a legend in the B Corp movement, but Andy Hawkins and I had a chat when I was still working at this last organization. He told me about the movement, the potential impact that it has for really widespread systems change. And yeah, that hooked me. And I felt like this role in particular was quite interesting in that it wasn't just about growth for growth's sake. We're not trying to certify every single company in the UK as a B Corp. We're trying to grow really intentionally so that we have a representative community that can really make the case for much wider spread change, either through regulatory change or legislative change, or even just cultural change within different sectors and within the wider business community.
Yeah. Andy helped us through our first certification, actually. So we love Andy.
Charismatic. It's always got
Best
like a,
shirts in the game as
yeah, I
well.
was going to say, he's always got like a wild, shirt
Yeah.
on.
So
Is it? Well,
sorry.
I was wondering. So, like, like B Corp's kind of like an alternative economic model for businesses, right? Um, what's so wrong with the current model?
So what we talk a lot about at B Lab and with B Corps is what sets them apart are they're kind of two different things. The first is that they're balancing stakeholder interests. So they're not just focused on kind of short-term profit for their shareholders at the cost of the environment or their workers. They're actually thinking about much longer term and within that, how you can build resilience into the business by considering the needs of all of their stakeholders. So the theory is that they're going to be more resilient, they're going to be actually more productive um, if they're thinking about the needs of their employees, whether it's in their kind of headquarter office or in their supply chain, the impact on the environment and ensuring that those resources are going to always be kind of readily available to them and at an affordable price. Their consumers, can they actually afford these products? Are they good for them? Are they healthy for them? And then of course profit as well. So they're balancing the needs of all of the different stakeholders that are absolutely required for their business to be profitable, to be resilient, um, and to continue operating, really. So the first thing that I think sets B Corps apart from the rest is that they have this long-term, much more focused on resilience and productivity mindset because they're thinking about the needs of all of their different stakeholders. And then I think the second is around continuous improvement. So a B Corp is not just a company that kind of goes through this process and then once they've met the requirements, they're a perfect company and they don't need to do anything anymore. What they really all share is this commitment to continuous improvement. So they're always identifying areas where they could be doing things better, maybe where they could be working with others in their supply chain or their sector in order to create different ways of doing things or to engage with the circular economy or to challenge issues around waste or around how we support inclusion within our companies. So the job is really never done. And they also have to recertify every 3 years. So they need to show that they're making improvements and they're making progress. So those two things I think really are what set B Corps apart from mainstream businesses. And it's what's going to get us to a kind of economic system that works for more than just shareholders. It's going to work for employees, it's going to work for consumers, and it's also going to work for the environment.
Yeah, I think we found when we went through the process ourselves as a small business that it was a great roadmap of helping us to just build a business as well. When with a lot of things that you're not so sure about in those early days, and you know the B impact assessment is obviously great for setting out those steps.
Yeah, definitely. That is a really common conversation that I have with companies that are just thinking about certifying, especially if they're a startup or they've only been around for maybe a few years, but there's lots of things they're doing that are relatively informal and they want to find a way to kind of professionalize it or set more systems in place. And the B impact assessment, I always just tell them, is a really good tool for getting the basics and the foundations right within the business. And even if you don't go on to certify right away, it's a free tool. Anyone can access it. I just think it's a brilliant resource for any
amazing.
business.
Yeah, it's like free how to start a great business. Here you go.
Yeah.
Not quite that easy, but
like having gone through it ourselves, and we deal with like lots of small businesses and big businesses. I think that the thing a lot of people don't realize is when people start businesses, maybe not like these ones where you get funding and you have this like ambitious growth plan, but when people start like independent businesses, most of them start out with an idea and then they realize that they don't know anything about what they're doing or how to run a business or how to so definitely it really helped us just having some structure. It's kind of made us think a bit more like a bigger company. I think gave us that strategy almost. Yeah.
So B Lab have recently overhauled its B Corp standards. They're moving from a point-based system to a more holistic approach. What were the main drivers of this overhaul, and what do they reveal about the evolving role of B Lab in today's ESG landscape?
So evolving our standards it's pretty much baked into the DNA of the B Corp movement. We've actually updated our standards 6 times since the B Corp movement was founded about 18 years ago or so. And the same commitment that we ask B Corps to make around continuous improvement, we hold ourselves to the same standard. So we're always reviewing our standards, we're updating them. And part of the reason behind that is because what might be cutting edge or quite a different way of approaching business right now, hopefully will become much more mainstream in the future. So we always need to be improving these standards, raising the bar, and helping B Corps to really stay at the cutting edge of what it means to be a purposeful business. So I think it was in December of 2020, we announced our latest standards review, and kind of public consultation process followed from that. And what we were really focused on was ensuring that we could really clarify the requirements and the key areas that we think purposeful businesses need to be looking at and really start to raise the bar. So these new standards are more ambitious than they've ever been before. I think they're a lot more clear about what it means to be a purposeful business and to be a B Corp. Um, and yeah, the idea is really that we have this whole group of companies that are really committed to continuous improvement and to purposeful business. And when we update our standards, we're supporting them to almost raise the bar and meet this new level of requirements. And then, of course, continuously improve with their recertifications every 3 years. So essentially, it's just times and markets change. Unfortunately, social and environmental crises are still escalating. And we need to make sure that our standards are going to consistently meet that challenge. And then there's a little bit around kind of changes to the regulatory environment and to consumer demands. So the B Corp standards really need to change along with that.
Mm. And if you're currently a B Corp certified business, and you're thinking, oh, what's going on? What kind of like support are you giving to companies to help them through that change onto the new standards?
hmm So the first thing I'd say is when you go into our B Impact assessment, which is the tool that companies use to assess against our standards, you can still see our current standards in there, and you can still certify on the current standards if you're not yet a B Corp. But we've also made available our new standards on the B Impact assessment tool, and you can start to self-assess against them. So once you go in and you let us know the size of your company, the sector that you're in, you'll be able to see what the requirements are on these new standards. And there's a bit of a RAG rating tool where you can just highlight, are you meeting the standard? Yes or no? Do you have a little bit of work to get there? So it almost creates a bit of a roadmap for what you need to do in order to meet those standards. So the first thing I'd say is to log on to the B Impact assessment, start engaging with that self-assessment tool. It would then also give us at B Lab UK a good idea of where companies are against those standards, and then we can start to really tailor some of our support around that. So for example, if B Corps are telling us that in some of these areas, they're already doing really well, but in other areas, for example, maybe around setting science-based targets around emissions, then we can really tailor our support around that and make sure we're offering resources and training to get B Corps up to that level of these new standards. We're also going to start releasing training, I think in the next month or so. I might need to send you the date after this to clarify it. But we're going to start releasing training, hopefully monthly training on each of the different topics. So there's 7 topic areas now within the new standards. We'll be releasing training for B Corps, and then following that up with a webinar where B Corps can come and ask questions, clarify different elements of it, and hopefully also just have some Q&A with the team, and then share some insights with one another to understand how other B Corps are meeting that requirement.
So it's all, at the moment, this is quite recent still, isn't it? Would you say 2025 is the kind of year where B Corps are kind of getting used to it, understanding it, familiarizing themselves with it? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's right. So we'll actually start to certify companies and B Corps on the new standards in 2026. So we released them earlier this year with the idea that companies and B Corps can start to self-assess against them, become familiar with them. We can provide some training and answer questions. We can also support B leaders to update their knowledge and skills around the new standards so that they can help B Corps and other companies. So it's a year of really just getting familiar with the new standards, sharing experiences around how companies might already be meeting them, And then in 2026, that's when we'd actually start certifying companies.
I was going to say, so you so you touched on when businesses fill out that assessment, obviously you're getting data, right? So you've got a bit of a picture about all the different companies.
Mhm.
Are there like what are the common areas that businesses struggle with when trying to achieve the accreditation?
So it really does depend on the sector and the size. So what might be challenging for one sector is maybe less of a focus for another one. I'd say within the UK, because the B Corp movement is a global movement, so the standards are designed in a way so that we can benchmark globally. And there are some differences between, for example, companies that might be operating in developing versus developed markets. But for the most part, we try to keep this global benchmark. And in the UK, B Corps do tend to do pretty well on the worker section. I think for more manufacturing and retail companies, the supplier section can be quite difficult. Creating transparency in our supply chains is probably one of the biggest challenges in the world of business today, just point blank. So this can be quite challenging for any business. Sometimes there's also challenges for companies around whether they serve clients in controversial industries. We are really clarifying what the thresholds are for this for B Corps in our new standards. And it can be quite challenging for some companies, especially those in professional services or advertising. It really pushes them to think about the kinds of sectors that they want to be taking revenue from and want to be working with. And it sets a clear bar of what that threshold should look like. So, for example, if a company is bringing in more than 1% of their revenue from a tobacco company, then they wouldn't be eligible for certification. So that can be quite a challenging element of the certification. And we have seen companies decide to update their policies around which clients they work with, which suppliers they have, in order to meet these new standards. So right away, you're already seeing an impact of the B Corp movement there and sort of divesting from some of these industries. So yeah, I would say those are kind of the key ones, looking at your clients and your supply chains for companies wanting to achieve B Corp certification. Supply chain can be quite challenging, especially around lack of transparency within supply chains. I think also there can be a challenge around meeting the climate and nature requirements, so setting science-based targets and creating plans to reduce carbon emissions. And then finally around the types of clients that these companies work with and whether they're in industries that we would deem as controversial and potentially not having a place within an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system.
So, if for any like small business owners listening, or even potentially medium sized, would you say it's possible to go through the process that the business doing it themselves without investing a lot of money? Because I think it can seem quite overwhelming to a lot of businesses. Or do you see a lot of businesses? I think you mentioned like B leaders. Do you see a lot of businesses getting support, and would you perhaps advise that to some people, or is this something that you can do yourself with a bit of support from B Lab, maybe?
So the B impact assessment is designed in a way so that companies should be able to take themselves through the certification process on their own. With that said, it can be really helpful to have a B leader come in and support the company with the wider changes that they might be making along the way, especially if they don't have a team that's looking at this, or if the company hasn't found a way to really already embed purpose and sustainability within their work. Then bringing someone in with that knowledge and expertise can really support with kind of capacity building, with leading some of these process changes within the business. Um, and also just supporting them through the process of certification, helping them to kind of gather the evidence and go through the verification process. So lots of companies do opt to get support from B leaders, and the way that B leaders work is quite different. So some of them really target very small companies, and they do almost a cohort-based approach to keep costs down, and to make sure that it's really accessible for small and micro companies. Others specialize in working with much larger businesses where it would be more of a kind of consulting relationship and much more tailored to the business's needs. But I would say just going through the process of certification and using the B impact assessment, companies don't need to get external support. They can take themselves through it, but it really depends on where they're at already within their journey, whether they feel they have the skills and expertise within the company already to make any changes that they need to make, or if they would benefit from bringing in someone from the outside who can help lead that, and also ideally help capacity build, because I think a lot of these skills and knowledge should be within the business, and B leaders are a brilliant resource for doing that.
I know for us, like the time, just the finding the time as a really small business was really challenging. But then, having said that, it made us think about things that we never thought about before.
I think, it's just a kind of restructuring slightly, isn't it? Once you've got things set up, and now obviously we're as a company looking at the new standards and just rethinking things slightly. But it's not as scary as it sounds as a small business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I just encourage companies to get onto the B impact assessment and to start engaging with it, because I think it can feel quite daunting, especially if you're going through the pretty large PDF that we have, which covers the new standards and what's included in all of it. Using the tool is a much easier way of understanding what the requirements are and then self-assessing against them. And then once you've spent some time on it, it starts to make it feel a little bit less scary. But it's not to diminish the process itself and how much work it takes. It does require time. It does require resourcing. And I think the companies that find it really useful, like yourselves, for example, are considering it not just as like a bolt-on, where maybe sustainability or environmental or social impact sit just in a corner of their business. They see it as really fundamental to the way that their business is built and the way that it operates. So they actually see the benefits of going through it, as almost like building the foundations or improving some of the policies and practices that you already have in place. It's not necessarily just like this added bolt-on that can take additional time. It's seen as really fundamental to improving things within the business.
Yeah,
it's exactly what we found.
Definitely.
So so some of the bigger brands that are B Corps have been criticised over the last couple of years for achieving their status despite maybe some ethical or sustainability issues, and that's led some people to kind of claim that B Corp can be just greenwashing. But I just wondered, like from your perspective, how do you respond to that kind of pushback?
So from my perspective, if we're actually going to achieve economic systems change, we need to transform the way that business is being done across all sizes of business. And actually, some of the larger businesses, we have greater potential for impact there because of their outsized influence on employees, workers in their supply chain, or even the suppliers that they're working with, consumers, definitely on the environment as well. So I think we would be missing a trick if we weren't trying to engage very large companies within this movement. I think it has also brought up a really interesting discussion, and we really embrace the tensions that are inherent in this, and are kind of pleased that we're able to host this discussion or this debate to better understand what the role of these very large companies are in our economic system and what kind of changes they need to make for us to actually be able to realize that more inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system. So from my perspective, it's much better to have them within the movement where we can influence some of the changes that they're making, where they can network with smaller businesses and share some of the work that they're doing and kind of collaborate together to improve things. And it also creates this almost accountability mechanism. So as our standards, we raise the bar with them and introduce new standards. In order to retain certification, they will have to meet those new requirements. So we don't weaken our standards to accommodate large companies. If anything, larger companies generally have to answer more questions, often more difficult questions. and they need to meet a much higher set of requirements for verification, in particular around transparency, and then also kind of meeting additional factors based just on their size. So I think having these companies meet those minimum requirements, and then once they're in the movement, we can support them to continuously improve, identify some of the areas that they're not doing as well in, and really act as leaders within this space has a much greater potential to transform our economic system. And the basis of our economic system are SMEs. So it's absolutely right that the majority of the B Corp movement are made up of these brilliant SMEs, but bringing some of these larger companies into the movement and getting them involved in this network of thought leaders and business leaders who are really disrupting the way that things work, for me, can only be a good thing. And I think the pathway towards change, it's not comfortable, it's not necessarily straightforward. I think that there is space for debate around this and for us to learn from these different perspectives and maybe to bring them into our standards as we update them. But ultimately, if we're going to create systems change, we need all sizes of business within the movement. And it's brilliant to see some of these larger businesses that are taking on that leadership and putting themselves out there and committing to continuously improving their work and being accountable for it.
Yeah, and I suppose like you have to remember how challenging it is for a really big business that's got like a global supply chain where they may be sourcing stuff from developing countries, for example. Um, you'd almost be surprised if they didn't find issues in their supply chain, especially if this is like new, more detailed processes and investigations that they've never done before.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've been working at B Lab for just over 3 years, and there are a couple of quite large companies I'm working with who I've been working with since I started. So the process is not quick for them. It takes a lot of time. They really have to do quite a lot of investigation within their group structure. And then once they are part of the community, it doesn't just mean they're done. It means they need to keep engaging with the process in order to recertify, but also they're accountable. So if issues are raised with us, we have a complaints procedure, a public complaints procedure that we run, and they are then committed to investigating it and to understanding what's gone wrong. And most of the companies where they have gone through a process like that have done something to remediate it and have created transparency around it.
I think it's hard because in terms of like sustainability, consumers are becoming so savvy now, aren't they? And they will pick up on any potential greenwash or any little issue will be blown up a lot. And it's not to say it shouldn't be, but it's almost like with, I guess, every business, it is a journey, isn't it? And there will be problems along the way. And I think it's very easy for critics just to say, oh, well, that's a load of rubbish because of that. And it's never quite that simple, is it? It'd be good if it was that simple, but it's not.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think that just continuing to create space for these dialogues and debates is really important because it's how we learn and how we do things better going forward. But for me, greenwashing needs to be about quite vague claims, maybe flowery marketing language, and there's a lack of substance sitting behind it. Whereas a company that's going through the B Corp certification process, it's a very rigorous process. We're looking at all of their operations across a number of different impact areas. They have to evidence what's happening in those areas. If there's been any sort of issues identified within their work, they need to remediate it. There's a lot of transparency around that. So for me, greenwashing, it needs to be much more vague than that. It needs to be with a focus on marketing. There shouldn't be any real substance behind it. And I think what it is to be a B Corp is the opposite of that. They're going through a third-party verification. They're quite clear on what it means to be a B Corp and the requirements they're meeting. And we're doing even more work with the update to our new standards to make it even easier for consumers to understand what it means to be a B Corp and the minimum requirements that they need to meet.
Yeah, and I'd also like this is not necessarily an example of a brand that came under criticism, but I think was it like last year or the year before when Tony's Chocolonely, who obviously really focused on not having any child labour in their supply chain, found some effectively. But I thought the thing that was really powerful is that they were publicizing that, and they were saying that we found it, but they're almost using it to bring more attention to the problem, that they're trying to fix. And I think that's like, I feel like they did a good job of turning it into something that was way more engaging for their customers as well. So I think
Absolutely. I mean, we have to recognize that these are individual companies that are operating within a quite established system. So, like I said at the start, no B Corp is ever going to be perfect, but what they are committed to are continuously improving and acting as leaders within this new purposeful economy. So we can't kind of heap everything on one company to fix just because it's in that sector, but we can expect that they're going to remediate any issues when they identify them, that they'll be transparent about it, and that they're going to be doing something to shift the business practices within their sector and to really lean into them. And especially in our new standards, we have a new topic requirement around government affairs and collective action. And in the past, we've wanted B Corps to be doing this. We've encouraged them to. We've supported them to be engaging in collective action. But in the new standards, it will actually become a requirement. So companies will need to work with other companies in their sector or their region, or potentially even universities, to create advancements in the way that business is being done so that it's balancing the needs of all stakeholders, whether they're focusing on kind of climate and nature or social impact, whatever makes the most sense for the purpose of their business. But as a minimum requirement, they have to start engaging in that.
Cool. So I wanted to ask, how is B Lab empowering certified businesses to collaborate, advocate, and lead beyond their own checklists?
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty good segue, because now with the new standards, we're introducing this requirement around government affairs and collective action. But what we're doing at B Lab UK to actually support B Corps to do that, we have a number of different opportunities for B Corps to engage in. So, for example, we have regional groups called B Locals, where B Corps within a certain region or a city can get together, where they can think about the impact that they want to collectively have on their community. For example, we have the B Corp Beauty Coalition, which is actually a global working group, but it's a group of beauty B Corps that are really trying to change the way that this sector is operating to reduce their environmental impact, to lean much more into circularity and to reduce plastics use. And then we also have almost like, how would you describe it? Working groups which are focused on specific parts of a company, so specific departments. We have one around inclusion within companies, so people and employment practices around that. And we're definitely going to be looking to scale up these different touch points to make sure that every B Corp feels like they can engage either with other B Corps or other community actors, or other companies that really want to change the way that business is being done. And then I guess the other key thing that we've been doing is a campaign. So you might have heard of the Better Business Act. I think there's around just over 3,000 companies that are now backing that particular campaign. About 25% of them are B Corps. And essentially, what the Better Business Act is campaigning for is a change to UK legislation, which would mean that all businesses de facto need to align profit with other stakeholder needs. So that legal change that all B Corps make to their constitutional documents to say that when they're making decisions within the business, they're balancing the needs of all stakeholders. The Better Business Act is calling for this to be updated within UK law. So every business would be operating in this way. So we have lots of examples of where B Corps are able to kind of take collective action together, work together with specific issues or sectoral issues that they want to focus on, and then also this campaign around a much wider policy change. And with the new standard bringing in that requirement for all B Corps to take collective action, we're just going to be scaling that up and thinking about the different ways that we can support B Corps to almost act as influencers, within business, whether that's cultural change within business practices or actually demanding regulatory or legislative change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we found really powerful. It's just like the community aspect of it. The impact of that, but also the impact it has on like our business, just being part of that kind of community and hearing other stories. I wondered if you got any more like specific examples or stories of B Corps that have created real change in society.
Yeah, loads.
You're-
Actually, one I came across recently is a company called Ocean Bottle. They're on a mission. Their entire purpose is really to reduce plastic waste in seas. So for every reusable bottle that they sell, the company actually removes the equivalent of 1,000 plastic bottles in weight. It is a newer business, and kind of in their first year, they turned over $1 million in revenue. So I think it really shows the potential that these new businesses have to create positive impact, but to also get a foothold within the economy. Um, Also Finisterre. I don't know if you know Finisterre, but I absolutely love their stuff. I'm not a surfer, but they make me kind of want to be a surfer. They have all kinds of different ways that they're engaging with the local community and kind of campaigning that's happening within the community, whether it's surfers against sewage. But they also have this really brilliant charity program where I don't know if you've ever tried to put a wetsuit on, but it's incredibly difficult. It's very challenging. And so for people with disabilities, with physical disabilities, it can be even more challenging to be able to surf or to access the sea with a wetsuit. So they have a charity program where they're actually redesigning some of these wetsuits to be able to fit people's bodies and to get them back in the sea and surfing again. So I think those are two examples of B Corps that are really thinking about their purpose and how it's designed within its business model. And then you can see the really tangible impact that has either on the environment or on its local community. And then also whenever you sort of get surveys from their employees, what makes them want to stay, what made them want to work there in the first place, they pretty regularly say that um, one of the reasons that they wanted to join was because of the values of the company, the purpose, and how that aligns with their purpose as an individual. And that's the reason they stay as well, because today people want to work for businesses that are aligned with their values and where they can feel like they're really making a difference. So they're doing the right thing, but then they're also able to attract really brilliant talent and retain them, and then even improve the way that they're doing business from that.
Yeah, we found that that's helped us a lot, attract and retain talent. I mean, we used to be based on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and
the middle of nowhere, literally.
It was really tricky. We have since moved, but it was tricky for a while.
Don't tell me that. That's my dream. I'm from Vancouver Island, and yeah, as a kid, I used to do harvesting in the summer, and for a stint after university, I worked on an organic farm. So I always have it in the back of my mind that one day I'm gonna move back out and live on a farm, but we'll see.
What's one surprising thing that you find people often get wrong about B Corp certification?
I think there is a misconception that B Corp is for every company but the company that's currently considering it. So I'll hop on calls with companies of all different sizes to chat them through the process and what it's like to join the community. And one of the first things they almost always say is, well, if they're a medium-sized business, well, aren't B Corps just for very small businesses? Or if they're a very small business, they'll say, isn't it? It's for much larger businesses. So there's this kind of misconception that B Corp is something that can only be done by every company but themselves. And actually, the way that it works is it's slightly tailored depending on the size of the company, the sector that they're in, and then also the global market that they're in. So we are ensuring that the standards are relevant and accessible for every size and sector of company. It can be more challenging for some companies. I think for very large companies, there's obviously a much longer process of transformation that they need to go through, which I think is really important. And for some small companies that are resource scarce, it can also take a longer period of time, but there's no rush. You don't need to do it within a certain time frame just because another company did it in a certain time frame. You don't need to kind of make it a rush. You don't need to do it within 6 months. And it is for every size of business. And I think it's so crucial that we ensure that every size of business is becoming a B Corp, because otherwise it can be quite difficult to make the argument that every business in the UK should be operating like a B Corp, because you can always pick holes and say, oh, well, it's just a bunch of 5-person businesses, or, well, it's only very large 250 plus employee businesses. So we really do want to show that spread. And I think we've been able to do that with the B Corp movement here in the UK.
Yeah, and I think we found like with typically with like accreditations, a lot of the time it's just a way of a company trying to say, well, we can prove we're really good at this. But I think for us, we didn't quite realize until we went through the process that it's actually just a really great tool to make your business a bit better, like we've kind of already discussed. But
Absolutely. Were there any misconceptions you had before you went through the process, or any sort of surprises going through it?
yeah, well, I kind of thought like, like as a really small business, can we become a B Corp? Because surely you have to be like really good socially and environmentally, and then you get the stamp, But like I said, it kind of, to us, well, for me anyway, it was kind of like, oh, actually, this is actually about how we can become a better business, So that was the thing for me.
When I discovered it randomly and thought it was more like environmental, and obviously once I fell down that rabbit hole, I realized it was a lot more than that. And I just hadn't really considered, because you were the one that wanted to create a business that was good for people.
Yeah.
And I was always looking at more the environmental side of things. And so I came across it and thought, oh, this is something that kind of merges them both. But yeah, which obviously happens anyway, but I just hadn't considered that in my head at that moment in time.
Yeah, that definitely is another misconception about B Corp, is that it's just an environmental certification. So I think there's some work to do around communicating the more holistic approach that the certification has.
So if someone's curious about B Corp and wants to explore it further, what's the first step you'd recommend?
Create an account on the B Impact Assessment. Start to look through the current standards if you think that you might want to certify within the next 6 months or so, or start to self-assess on the new standards if you're looking at a bit of a longer term process. And then I'd say the next thing is to try and engage with the community in some way. So we do have lots of local events that are happening, that are usually put on by the B locals, that are great opportunities to hear more about the movement, maybe have a chat with some of the B leaders and understand what they offer, what their processes are. And we also have free training as well. So right now the training is focused on our current standards, but if you just type in B Lab UK training, you'll find it. And it gives a really good overview of what the process looks like, a bit more background on the movement, and also shares case studies on B Corps as well. So I've given you more than one thing, but hopefully that's useful. And yeah, just back to my first point, log into the BIA, log into the B Impact Assessment, create an account.
So, final question. It's the 9th of July, 2035. 10 years in the future. Where is the B Corp movement in 10 years?
So this is great timing of a question, because we actually just launched our new 10-year strategy at B Lab UK. And it has quite a punchy vision, which is all UK businesses acting as a force for good. And force for good bit, to clarify that, we're really looking at three things. We want companies to be adopting a stakeholder approach to running a business. So thinking about people, planet, and profit. We also want them to be demonstrating new models and ways of doing business that protect climate and nature. And we also want them to be brilliant places to work. So providing good salaries, good benefits, thinking about inclusion, justice, and equity within their work. Um, and we've talked about this a little bit at the start that, we don't have an ambition to certify every single company in the UK as a B Corp. And part of that is because it's not scalable. That's not the way that you're going to create the real systemic change that we need within our economic system. So the way that we think we're going to get there in the next 10 years or so is to support B Corps to act as influencers and to support them to really take that collective action that we've been talking about. So whether that means banding together to shift cultural or behavioral practices within their sector or their region across those three themes, or actually campaigning with us to create legislative or regulatory change. So we think a lot needs to change culturally and behaviorally across the board within business in the UK, but it's not enough for businesses to just choose to do things differently and to act differently. We also need the regulatory and legislative changes and also potentially some policy incentives to make that possible. And to ensure that when companies are acting in this way, they're not being penalized, they're actually able to thrive and be incentivized to do so.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Sounds good.
No, it's great. We always ask on the final question, like, where do you see whatever you're doing in 10 years? So it's great to finally have a guest that's like, we've planned it all out.
Yes. That's the first time that's happened.
Well, it's funny. I normally say, especially working for nonprofits, your usual answer is, well, we hope to not exist in 10 years because we will have solved the problem. But I think this one is a little bit different because obviously we have standards which will set out the minimum requirements that we think need to be changed across the board for all businesses. But the whole point of improving the standards is to make sure we're always continuously improving. So I don't know, the B Corp movement could be one of those nonprofits that don't have a plan in place to put themselves out of work because there's always a need for continuous improvements, especially with something as big as our economic system.
Yeah. Also, none of those charities ever actually put themselves out of work anyway, so
kind of a sad mission to have because then you're still there 10 years later and you're like,
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. We hope it was truly worth your while. For more information, visit reusebox.co.uk/worth-your-while.
And if you'd like to appear on the next series of Earth Your While, please email media@reusebox.co.uk.